Okay, here we go.
See these nice marble floors?
Into the elevator. So here we are for Granddad's retirement. Dun da da da. Arnall, Golden, and Gregory. Here we are. Nice. Look at this lobby.
Okay.
Hi. Can you take a little of this? We're here for the retirement party.
Vita's here. We were like turning around.
Liz.
Hi, Scott Peterzell. Good to see you.
Hello.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, that's good.
My
Ready for the new thing?
Thank you for coming.
Congrats. This is great.
Come on in, y'all.
My goodness. Good to see you.
Everybody's here.
Marc embodies not if but how. And in fact, could have even been Marc who coined the phrase, I don't know, because it predated me. But Marc always spent lots of time around the train table in his office with clients asking questions and trying to get to the bottom of what their goal was. And I learned so much just from sitting and watching him in action, and in terms of how to practice the not if but how methodology, which we still, of course, that's our motto today. And of course, I can't think about Marc without thinking about GHCA conferences and how to really entertain clients and get to know them. And I'm sure other people might have comments they want to make about that, but that's all I'm going to say now. And on a personal level, Marc took David and me in and entertained us, cooked for us. If only I'd learned to cook like Marc can cook. And I didn't get that skill, but I did learn to always put a little bit of whimsy in every room in the home. And that's something I try to do now and think of Marc all the time. So anyway, Marc, many of us in this room are here at the firm in large part, either directly or indirectly, because of you, and we all thank you and we love you. And now I know there's others that have comments they'd like to make. Yes?
Peterzell was going to be standing up there.
I know.
Because my initial comment, which I've worked on for weeks, is that almost 50 years ago, when Marc and I first met, I never thought that 50 years later I would be standing here at his retirement party with him. Because in fact, there are a lot of people 50 years ago that would not have thought both of us would be standing here in 50 years or standing anywhere else in 50 years. But in fact, it's been a quick 50 years. From a legal standpoint, just a couple of things, Marc, that he did during his career that I recall. Is one, he was the first head of the recruiting committee here. Before then, it was everybody knocked on the door and hopefully got a job. Well, when Marc took it over, it became much more organized. The other thing was he was the first head of the healthcare group. And I have two stories about how he got this. One is his, the other one is mine. His story is that, as was the practice back then, when the firm was much better organized than it is now, that when something came up at the Golden, we'd get a call from a client who happened to own a nursing home and had a nursing home problem. So Mr. Golden did what everybody in a well-organized firm would do. He walked down the hall and spotted the first lawyer he saw and told him to go out and deal with it. And that's how Marc became head of the healthcare office. Now, my story is, Marc being from Moss Point, Mississippi. That in and of itself is enough, but actually, a little-known fact is he, as a teenager, worked in a cat food factory. And anybody that works in the cat food factory would probably have some interest in healthcare. Since Marc and I we're always in different departments. We never really worked together. But we have been friends from the day he got here, practically 50 years ago. Not many people can claim that they have someone they knew and worked with, have been close friends for 50 years. But they didn't know Mark. Mark is easy to be a friend with. He always was available to me and his other friends. He would listen with a sympathetic ear to any problems we had. He actually would give advice from time to time. Once in a while, it would be good advice. And he also was available at the drop of a hat for any other problem that came up. And that is a rare quality in anybody. And you're lucky to have a friend like that. He also was a source of a lot of good stories I will remember, none of which I'll repeat today. Now, as he moves on to the next phase of his life, I want nothing more than for him to have a good life, because he deserves it. Thank you.
I have many Mark stories to tell, but I won't. I will say that he bears the firm's original sin, because he signed the letter inviting me to come for an associate in November of 1978. I think Mark was very advanced for his time in the area of marketing. He was building his practice in the healthcare nursing home industry. He dragged me into helping GHCA with their semi-legal medical plan trust. And long before Glenn and Hetty were even thought of, he used to bring me down to the GHCA convention to help run the party. And we started those days by running the beer cart at the golf tournament. We had Arnall and Gregory festooned all over it, and I was the most popular person on the golf course. And we did that. We plied them with Arnall and Gregory beer for the entire afternoon. And then we would go over to a rented house, some such place, and have a party. And, around 10 or 10:30 or so, Mark would be passed out on the floor. It was my job to close the party.
But you were also passed out.
And I remember going to the Savannah, whatever the hotel is on the river, and going into the bar late at night where Neil Pruitt Sr. would be seated drinking bottles after bottle after bottle of Bud Light. And I would sit down next to him, one stool away, one stool in between us, and I would drink bottle after bottle after bottle of Bud Light. And then once in a while he would turn over and say, I like you. You're a lawyer and you don't talk. I could go on, but I want you to know that Mark has been a mentor to me since 1980. In fact, he glommed almost all my summer associate time in 1979 also. He is a good friend. I've had many lunches with him, and I wish him the best.
So I started work with Mark as a first-year associate about 32 years ago. I was in general litigation, got randomly assigned to work on a nursing home case as a nursing home up in Roswell that was being decertified or terminated from Medicare and Medicaid by the state. And it was Mark's client. And looking back, it really was one of the greatest strokes of luck in my career. I didn't quite realize it at the time. When I first went to get the assignment, I set foot for the first time in Mark's office. I'd never really seen anything quite like it. Eddie's mentioned the mock-up of the Alpine town, the corner. Another corner, there was a bar with, liquor. Mark really was the embodiment of the Mad Men era. In a good way. That's just a start. There was this rainbow-colored centaur man-horse hanging from the ceiling.
A wrinkle in time.
Yeah, pencils that were sticking out, which, were you writing in didn't have a place to put a pencil. Yeah, I had that happen. And this thing looked like out of Dr. Seuss, this weather vane, kind of weird looking thing, and an elephant's trunk sticking out of a drawer. What else? His whimsy really run amok. But I took immediately to Mark. I think a lot of folks really gravitated to Mark. He's smart, irreverent. He's a maverick, kind of before Sarah Palin gave the word, bad name. And he had a great practice. He had been practicing at that point for, I guess, maybe 19 years, 16 years here. And the firm was already well established in healthcare. And it may have been, because I had my lucky break by being called onto that case with Mark, it may have been a lucky break for Mark for Saul to drag him into that, but he really built something out of it. And it's become really one of the premier healthcare practices in the country. It's probably about a quarter of our revenue. A lot of firms would really love to have this healthcare practice, but they didn't have a Marc Peterzell to really help it take off. Mark pulled me into the Georgia Healthcare Association, which is represented here today by its past chair, Harp August. It's one of the oldest, probably most important clients that the firm has, and he's really mentored a lot of folks along the way in nurturing that relationship and keeping it going. But beyond opening those doors, I learned a lot from Mark. Mark's got a saying that law is a helping profession, and he really means it. And it really, I think, has become part of the DNA of our group. I think a corollary to that is that practicing law should be fun, and that would rub off practicing with Mark. We've all got sort of our little Markisms that we remember, but I don't know how many times I'd be in his office and we would call some state or federal official about something, and Mark, I think intentionally, is the person's asking his name, he would drop his voice a couple octaves to this gravelly kind of South Georgia thing and say, "Marc Peterzell." And the person would ask him to spell it, and he would kind of smirk at everybody in the room because we knew it was coming. He'd say, "Well, it's P as in Peterzell." And he'd just be so proud of himself. And it seemed like it would get old, but it never really did. But a lot of Mark's left his mark on the firm. Really the industry focus that we have is something that I learned from Mark. Is really part, again, of the DNA of the firm. The not if but how, Mark was the marketing partners during his tenure that we came up with that. And how many years later, it's still the tagline for our firm. And so really, he's really left a mark on all of us. He helped launch my career, for which I'm eternally grateful. So thank you, Mark, for all you've done. Congratulations on an outstanding legal career, and we hope that you're not a stranger.
I do have some remarks, and I want to focus first on how the firm got to where it began to get to where it is. Shouldn't have had that wine. I know I shouldn't. Anyway, many of you know this, but some don't. 1949, 3 individuals got together to form a law firm. And they were a peculiar group of individuals. One was a politician who's just gotten through with his tenure as governor, Arnall. The other was Saul Goldman, an entrepreneur, if there ever was one, and a lawyer, and a brilliant lawyer at that. And he used to say, Saul Goldman, that his clients could make the best argument against capitalism you could possibly make. And I thought that was a wonderful expression. If you knew the clients, you'd know exactly what he meant. Arnall said when he came to the firm that he was the politician. He would work that phase of practice. Saul Golden was the go-getter to get business, to do transactions that he wanted to do, but thought we ought to have at least one real lawyer in the firm. And they chose Cleveland Gregory. And he was a lawyer's lawyer, if there ever was one. And I had experiences with all of them. I don't know how many people here, if any, have worked with all the all three of the founding partners. Gregory, anybody else?
Warren.
Warren? Okay, Warren.
Yeah.
And Jim, okay.
Mark, put the speaker.
Oh, that's what this is? I thought it was my protection.
Bill Kitchens, Mark.
I'm sorry?
Bill Kitchens.
Oh, Bill Kitchens, okay.
You're supposed to hold it up to your mouth.
Yeah.
Anyway, Saul Golden, well, obviously, I'm sorry. The microphone plus the memory, yeah. That's a lot to handle.
I'm a singer.
She's a singer. That's my daughter. It's quite nostalgic for me to focus on the work each of those three founding partners gave me, the experiences I had with them. Ellis Arnall, for instance, called me one night at home and said, "Mark," that's the way he talked, "Mark, you know anything about securities law?" I said, "Yeah, I do, Mr. Wilson. I think what's your problem?" "Well, I don't know what the problem is," he said, "but you be here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I got some people I want to meet with you." So, 9 o'clock tomorrow. Well, first of all, I went and looked at the securities law. That was foresight, if I ever. And so, sure enough, I read the book and all the things, the whereas and all that. I went to his office as expected. He said they had two people sitting on his little sofa, and they were both sort of shivering. They looked like they were really afraid. And he said, "Mark," he said, "you got the securities law with you?" "Yes, sir, I have it." He said, "Well, I want you to look at the penalty section. Just read it to me, if you will." So I said, "Well, okay, it says that if you violate this law, you can go to jail for 10 years or pay $10,000. What else? Or both." "Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you being here." And I walked out. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was setting the fee. Anyway, and then with respect to Saul Golden, he had a way of working day and night. He expected everybody else to do that. And he had a habit of calling people when he thought of a question at any time of the day and night, or night. And one night, about 12:30, after doing this for some time, about 12:30 at night, he called and he said, "Mark, I got this question." I said, "Okay, Mr. Golden." And I thought to myself, I've got to stop this. So I looked up the question, went down to the office at midnight, looked up the answer, called him at 5 a.m. and said, "Mr. Golden, I got the answer for you." "What? You know what time it is?" I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Golden, but I knew if you called me at midnight, it must be important." He never called me again. And then there was Cleveland Gregory, who was a lawyer's lawyer if there ever was one. And I had a personal injury client had called me. I didn't do that work, but they called me anyway. And we had one lawyer in the firm at that time who had done personal injury work. And he was going to, I said, "Well, we have one lawyer who'll do it." And he said, "Okay." Gave it to that one lawyer. And about, I don't know, two or 3 weeks, no, I guess it was about 2 months, 3 months later, he called me one night in tears, one Sunday night. He said, "Mark, I let the statute of limitations run. I didn't file the suit in time. And we're going to be sued and blah, blah, blah. And I thought a minute and I said, you know, I remember from law school, there was something called a totaling of the statute during periods of incapacity. And I said, that ought to be something we could use to extend the statute of limitations. Something years ago, I don't even do that kind of work. And so he said, I said, I want you to file the lawsuit right away, as soon as you can Monday morning, and we'll deal with it after that. And he did. And he went, and then of course the court, the other side, the defendant said, well, you missed the statute of limitations, you can't file this suit. The suit is not valid. And so I went to Mr. Gregory, the lawyer's lawyer, and I told him what had happened. He was mad as hell that I didn't supervise the attorney who had experience in this area. And he was quite right. And so I told him what my theory was, that you could extend the statute. And he said, well, maybe you're right, but the statute only applies to physical incapacity. And I said, where does it say that? It doesn't, it just says incapacity. So Cleveland Gregory, being the lawyer that he was, took that case to the Supreme Court and changed the law to where it now permits extending the statute for, you know, mental or emotional distress, which is a fairer way to do it, I think. Anyway, that was just one of each of experience for each of these people. Let's see here. I'm getting to the end of it. I see a couple people nodding off. And then I have a couple of things that personal things. I have a theory that we all are affected by very important events in our lives that we could never have anticipated. They just happen. And they have a great bearing on what we do with our lives. And in my case, with respect to this firm, when I was a young associate in New York, at a big firm in New York, my mother was in a very bad automobile accident on her way from Atlanta down to Mobile, where she was then living. And I would come down to see her. Now, oftentimes she was in the hospital at Crawford Long for forever, 9 weeks, I think, in intensive care. They said she wouldn't live. So I went in to see her one day, and she said, you know, Mark, you're in New York, you're working hard, you don't belong in that big city, you've got a little baby. You need to come to a city like Atlanta. And being someone who always did what his mother told him to do, I said, well, maybe I will. So I started looking at firms, and I looked at all sorts of firms. I was fortunate because at that time, many of the Atlanta firms wanted to have the capacity to do the work that was being done more or less exclusively in, New York and Chicago and so forth. And so I started looking. I got several offers from Atlanta firms. And one firm sort of stood out. Wasn't as big as the other firms. Wasn't as white shoe, if you will, if that's still a valid expression. But it was a place where people could be a little more entrepreneurial. And that was Arnall, Gould & Gregory. And I got that recommendation from several people, including the lawyer that I worked with and for in New York, who was a brilliant man. Just as an aside, he called me into his office one day and said, I'm going to dictate a brief this evening. And Miss Finelli, his secretary, back in those days they used shorthand, Miss Finelli is going to type it for you, and it'll be ready in the morning. And I want you to go through that. I think it was about a 50-page, 60-page brief, and I want you to critique it any way you can want to. I don't care what you do. I'll take whatever you do. I got the brief just as, as ordered the next morning, and I read it. I reread it, and I reread it. I know I spent 2 hours reading it. I don't know how many times. I couldn't change the comma, and I was embarrassed about that. I mean, here he'd hired me and all this, and I walked in there and to his office, and I said, Mr. Price, I couldn't change anything. He sort of chuckled, and he said, well, you'll learn. and I didn't. It was as good, as perfect as anything I'd ever seen. And that was one of those experiences. Another was when my mother was in a accident. What brought me to Atlanta was the fact that she was in an accident, told me to do this, and I did, well, I told you. So anyway, it's been a great experience. I hope to stay close to all of you, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Okay, just so we kind of leave on a little bit of a light note, Mark, I first worked at AG&G when I was between college and law school, and I met Mark. Mark was working here, and I was thinking, this guy's about as crazy as I am. And we've had all sorts of fun, but two stories. He talked about like the founding fathers and all of that. Well, Mark, as everybody knows, Mark's a bit of a free spirit, okay? So one thing that Glenn mentioned, this thing called a wrinkle in time. Well, Mark decided when he got that thing to hang it up in the hall. And Saul Golden came around and said, what is Peterzell hanging in the hall? And, well, if you've ever seen A Wrinkle in Time, it's like a combination of a centaur and Pegasus, the winged horse, but it's also anatomically correct. It is the male of the species, more or less in the rut, as they say in the business. So it's a rather imposing thing to have out in the hall. And so Saul insisted that somebody, come take that thing down, for God's sakes. But the other thing that I remember, and I'll let everybody go for whatever they want to do, but the other thing, Mark was in charge of the parties for a while at the firm, and so we always had this annual kind of Christmas party, and the governor insisted on everybody wearing a tuxedo. Well, Mark had a really good friend, Bill Swearengin, who owned a bunch of restaurants, and so Bill decided to close his place down on Sunday, so we had it on Sunday. Everybody shows up in the tuxedos. Mark hands out this menu that's got like 7 different courses, meat courses, different wines and stuff. As you can imagine, the founding fathers back then were all in their 60s and 70s. I mean, they had like 3 days of indigestion. the thing ended, the thing ended about 11:30, but that's the kind of free spirit that Mark is. That it's like, he's got a great sense of humor. I mean, everybody knows that. I mean, I can go in his office and we just kid around. We have the same sort of view of the human condition, which is I wouldn't recommend to anybody else, but it's a lot of fun. But anyway, Mark has been wonderful just to have around for the fun of it too. So there you go.
I'm just going to say something really quick. I'm Mark's oldest child, Leslie. So I was the baby that came down. Hi, Dad. And but I remember a couple of memories of just. I'm very free-spirited, so he did give birth to that. So anyway, I remember being about maybe 5 or 6 and coming to the office, and everybody at that time was having electric typewriters, doing very important work. And Mary was wonderful to me always, and she said, okay, Leslie, I know you have important work to do, so she would set me up on one of the typewriters, and I'd touch the thing, and I would... I think I broke at least 2 or 3 of those. And then later, you know, through the years, I'd come home from school and I'd call and I'd get Mary on the phone. She would always help me with things like, Mary, how do I cook a steak? And things like that. And she helped me so I didn't burn the house down, you know, and I wanted to do certain things. So, you know, thank you for that. And Deborah, of course, has been wonderful. So for me, you know, the secretaries here are the gateways for the families, at least for me. So I just want to say how they're like family to us. And so that's all. We're here from New York, and we're just so glad to be here.
We just have a token, a small token
Oh
of
my
our
God.
affection for you. And we know that you love, we know that you still love to dictate. So we thought this would be the perfect gift for you. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Mark, for everything. And as I mentioned before, we love you and we hope we see you all the time. Thank you.
Yeah, that was nice.
Shelly's father.